Welcome to this installment of Turn the Page. Today, in what is basically known as Books I Wish I Read Sooner, we're going to be talking about I Want My MTV. I Want My MTV is an oral history about MTV. Other books like this that I've read that I really enjoyed was on ESPN, Saturday Night Live, as well as CAA. What makes MTV a bit unique to all of those is everybody and anybody, entrepreneur, executive who works in media, launches a content brand, or works for a content brand, is always saying that they are the next MTV. And anybody who is building a company that has something that is supposément the next MTV is building the next Viacom. Now I'm going to preface everything I'm going to say in this video by saying the company most likely to be the next Viacom is probably Viacom. But it is possible for an entrepreneur or an executive to build the next MTV. Why? Because brands come and go. MTV today is not the MTV it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, and this book does a fantastic job of breaking that down. I Want My MTV is not just a story of the brand and the music videos, but as an entrepreneur, I really appreciated getting a story of Bob Pittman, John Lack, Fred Siebert, Tom Freston, and many others. The origins of MTV go back to John Lack's influential presentation in front of the recording industry called Video Music Tomorrow's Here, in which he got in front of all of these executives who worked for the record labels and said, guys, give us your music videos and we are going to build a 24-hour music video network. The reaction, as you can imagine, wasn't wonderful. Sid Sheinberg got up and said, we're not giving you our music. Undeterred, Lack went back to his boss, Jack Schneider, who turned around and reassured Lack that it would all be fine. We'll kick his ass. That, in essence, captures the spirit of MTV, the resistance that they faced, and how it went on to become one of the most influential brands of all time in media. To pull off the feat, Lack and his posse had to go up to Warner Communications and American Express, a very unlikely duo that had partnered to basically capitalize on the rising cable industry, and asked for $25 million. He didn't get his $25 million, but within that meeting, he ended up walking with $10 million that ended up becoming the seed capital for this nascent cable network. Why August 1st? The thinking was that if these kids have nothing better to do during summer days, when they're back from school at home watching this new channel, then they would go back in the fall and start talking about it to their friends. Basically, viral marketing before there was such a thing. So John Lack and Bob Pittman, two of the key influential executives early on, started to recruit a team that could basically launch this cable network. One of the first individuals who put up his hand was none other than Frederator's Fred Siebert, who at the time was working for the movie channel. Now, just to give you an idea of how scrappy MTV was early on, when Fred put up his hand and said, I'd like to take this on, does that mean I go look for somebody else to run the movie channel? Bob Pittman and John Lack said, no, not at all. You're going to do both jobs. And that famous logo? The MTV guys wanted to associate this brand with the most iconic moment in American history. They thought JFK assassination probably wouldn't go down too well. Moon landing. That's how the moon landing became emblazoned in the logo. You've heard that expression, success has many parents, but failure is an orphan. It's rather unclear in the book who the defining inventor of the name MTV was. It's also no secret that despite John Lack's tremendous influence in building this MTV brand, he wasn't necessarily given the proper credit once he left. At its peak, we always associate brands like MTV and ESPN with utter quality, the cream of the crop. But what this book does a great job of is showing how early on, not only that these people didn't have a clue what they were doing, but they were scrappy and they didn't have any resources. As Tom Freston, who went on to be CEO of MTV, would say, Bob Pittman never gave us $1 for anything. MTV didn't even have their own makeup early on. MTV didn't have budgets for too many things. What they did have is this F you to the world mentality that allowed them to go on and ride the cable wave. The way cable worked in a nutshell was that unlike traditional network television where you had ABC, CBS, and NBC on the dial, cable promised the lure of 500 channels, but really still had very limited slots made available to consumers. So what MTV decided to do in a kind of guerrilla marketing is they would slowly but surely enter second and third tier cities. That means they wouldn't necessarily start in New York City or LA, but they'd start in like Tulsa, Oklahoma. For them to expand into new markets, they would have to actually get consumers who would see them in different cities to become their champions. And another detail which is really critical is MTV had to fight two fronts: build up distribution, but also secure the content from record labels who didn't love the idea of not getting paid for their music videos. Say you're AC/DC and your manager notices that sales of Back in Black, for example, have spiked in Tallahassee, Florida. Well, eventually you start asking yourself a question: why Tallahassee, Florida? And then you play Columbo and you realize that MTV is in Tallahassee, and MTV has been playing Back in Black, the music video, non-stop in Tallahassee, which has led to a spike in awareness, a spike in interest, and ergo, more record sales. All of a sudden, AC/DC's manager starts calling his record label boss and says, we gotta get this music video out to more people. Therefore, record labels went from hating, distrusting, and not really liking MTV to becoming their best friend. Early on, MTV would get whatever it could get its hands on. That's why a lot of early music videos were very much just bands playing on stage. But eventually, budgets increased. Duran Duran started to become iconic for their music videos. Def Leppard's success exploded because of a few music videos that they made available. Michael Jackson's 1983 Thriller was basically one of those iconic watershed moments where MTV became more successful because of Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson became more successful because of MTV. The 1980s are effectively synonymous with these musical artists whose careers basically followed in parallel MTV's explosive growth. Slowly but surely, the slogan, "I want my MTV," became one of the most influential, successful slogans of all time. The book goes into great detail about the origins, birth, growth of MTV. You also get to understand how Viacom came out of nowhere and ended up acquiring MTV from Warner and Amex. You then see how Viacom started to slowly but surely replace the creatives with accountants and lawyers, which led to MTV losing some of its risk-taking culture, some of its creativity, and definitely some of its edge. MTV over time became what it sought to criticize and take down. 1991, when Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit came, it kind of reset the music industry. And it's not so much that it caught MTV off guard, but it ushered in this new era where MTV decided to move a little bit away from music videos and more into scripted programming. For one, record labels wanted to get paid, but it wasn't just that. MTV just came to the conclusion that if it owned the content that it was airing, it would be a more profitable network. They started to dip their toes into reality programming. The Real World was one of the first such shows. After The Real World, they went full throttle, pedal to the metal, and they started to expand the reality shows that they would air on MTV at the expense of music videos. MTV remained successful by every stretch of the imagination. It launched VH1, Nickelodeon, and many other brands that became equally, if not even more successful. But the defining moment why MTV probably lost its edge wasn't necessarily going into unscripted reality programming, but how it adapted or failed to adapt to the internet. There's no real reason why MTV didn't become MySpace, Facebook, or YouTube all in one. But because there was no real short-term economic return for MTV and Viacom to embrace the web, and in particular YouTube, MTV decided to take a very confrontational stance and, for all intents and purposes, avoid and ignore the internet, specifically YouTube. When videos from Viacom's vast catalog, specifically Comedy Central, started to appear on YouTube, Viacom decided to attack YouTube, launching a billion-dollar lawsuit against Google. The case was essentially unsettled. Google didn't win, Viacom didn't win, but for all intents and purposes, YouTube won. YouTube had basically replaced MTV as the most iconic brand in music and entertainment, and MTV had to play catch-up. So right now, MTV's future remains TBD, but Viacom has decided to make a lot of moves in the internet space to make up for lost time, and as I said earlier, it's highly probable that the next Viacom is in fact Viacom. So partly because MTV may never regain its lost shine, then reading this book gives you a sense of how MTV soared so high, so quick, and was so influential. So, have you read this book? What were your thoughts? And are there any other books you wish you'd read sooner?